The bourbon-soaked laughter at Fort Braxton's Officers Club died the moment 12-year-old Maya Johnson placed 10 bullets through the exact same hole at 50 meters. Colonel Marcus Steele's face went white as the target was retrieved, showing only one ragged opening where 10 perfect shots had passed through identical trajectories. Maya stood at perfect military attention, shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward, clutching a yellowed envelope against her chest like a shield. Her small frame seemed dwarfed by the room full of uniformed officers. But there was something in her bearing that spoke of discipline far beyond her years, of training that had been earned through tears and dedication. What happened that Friday afternoon would expose decades of prejudice, end a colonel's career, and prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon against ignorance is a child's unwavering determination to honor a fallen hero's memory. Fort Braxton Military Base sprawled across the Carolina landscape like a small city dedicated to the art of war. The Officers Club, with its leather chairs and mounted trophies, served as the unofficial headquarters for the base's command structure. Friday afternoons brought a familiar ritual of drinks, war stories, and the kind of casual camaraderie that came from shared service and mutual respect. The shooting range complex was considered sacred ground, a place where marksmanship was refined, where soldiers prepared for the life-or-death moments that defined military service. Access was strictly controlled, reserved for active personnel and their families under specific circumstances. The range had trained generations of soldiers, from fresh recruits to elite Special Forces operators, each leaving their mark on the legacy of American military excellence. This was 2009 in an America grappling with questions of equality and representation, where the military prided itself on being a meritocracy while still wrestling with the lingering effects of institutional bias. Fort Braxton, like many military installations, was a microcosm of these broader tensions, officially colorblind, but still influenced by the prejudices of the men who ran it. Maya Johnson had been born into a military family where service wasn't just a career, it was a calling. Her father, Sergeant David Johnson, had been a decorated infantry soldier whose reputation for courage and competence had earned him respect throughout his unit. David had grown up in Detroit's toughest neighborhoods, where survival often depended on quick thinking and quicker reflexes. The military had given him purpose, discipline, and a chance to serve something greater than himself. When Maya was 7, David had made a decision that would define both their lives, recognizing that his deployment cycles meant he couldn't always be there to protect his daughter. He'd begun teaching her to shoot. What started as basic safety lessons had evolved into comprehensive firearms training, conducted every weekend in the woods behind their base housing. David taught Maya not just marksmanship, but the mental discipline that separated good shooters from great ones. The training had been rigorous and methodical. David understood that his daughter would face challenges he'd never encountered: the intersection of being young, black, and female in environments that might not welcome her. He'd taught her to shoot with the precision of a sniper, to maintain composure under pressure, and to never let anyone's expectations define her capabilities. Every lesson had been infused with love, respect, and the understanding that excellence was the best response to prejudice. Maya's world had shattered 3 years earlier when David was killed in action during a Taliban ambush in Afghanistan. His final act had been to hold off enemy fighters while his unit evacuated wounded soldiers, a sacrifice that had saved 30 Marines and earned him a posthumous Medal of Honor. The grief had been devastating, but it had also crystallized Maya's determination to honor his memory through the skills he'd taught her. Maya's visit to Fort Braxton wasn't about proving herself or seeking recognition. It was about connection, the need to feel close to her father on the anniversary of his death, to practice the skills he'd taught her in the place where he'd honed his own abilities. The shooting range represented more than just a training facility. It was a sacred space where she could commune with his memory and demonstrate that his lessons had taken root. The conflict that awaited her was deeper than simple prejudice. Colonel Steele and his officers represented a system that paid lip service to equality, while maintaining barriers that kept certain people in their proper place. They saw Maya not as David Johnson's daughter or as a skilled young marksman, but as an intrusion, a child who didn't belong in their adult world, a black girl who threatened their comfortable assumptions about who deserved access to their facilities. Maya's challenge wasn't just about gaining access to the range, it was about confronting a system that would judge her based on her appearance rather than her abilities, that would dismiss her father's sacrifice while denying her the opportunity to honor it. The stakes were personal and profound, not just her own dignity, but the legacy of a hero who died believing that his daughter could overcome any obstacle through excellence and determination. But Maya Johnson hadn't come to Fort Braxton unprepared for the battle she was about to face, and the men who would underestimate her were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one you never see coming. Maya's approach to Colonel Steele had been carefully planned. She'd researched the base's policies, understood the chain of command, and prepared her request with the precision her father had taught her to apply to everything. The yellowed envelope she carried contained not just her father's Medal of Honor, but letters of recommendation from his former commanding officers and documentation of his exemplary service record. Her request was simple and reasonable: permission to use the shooting range for 1 hour to honor her father's memory on the anniversary of his death. She'd followed proper channels, submitted the required paperwork, and even arranged for adult supervision through Master Sergeant Williams, who'd served with her father and understood the significance of her request. But Maya had also prepared for rejection. She'd studied the base's history, researched Colonel Steele's background, and understood that her request would challenge assumptions about who belonged in military spaces. Her father had taught her that preparation was the foundation of success, that understanding your opponent was as important as understanding your weapon. The 3 years since her father's death had been dedicated to maintaining and improving the skills he'd taught her. Maya had practiced religiously, using every available opportunity to refine her marksmanship. She'd joined civilian shooting clubs, participated in youth competitions, and sought out mentors who could help her develop her abilities. Her dedication had been absolute, driven by the need to honor her father's memory and prove worthy of his sacrifice. Her preparation had gone beyond technical skills. Maya had studied military protocol, learned proper customs and courtesies, and develop the bearing and discipline that would mark her as a soldier's daughter. She'd practiced maintaining composure under pressure, controlling her emotions in challenging situations, and responding to disrespect with dignity rather than anger. Maya had also prepared psychologically for the confrontation she knew was coming. Her father had warned her about the prejudices she might face, the people who would judge her based on her age, race, and gender, rather than her abilities. He'd taught her that the best response to discrimination was excellence, that superior performance could overcome even the most entrenched biases. Maya's entrance into the officers' club had been deliberate and respectful. She'd waited for an appropriate moment, approached Colonel Steele with proper military courtesy, and presented her request with the professionalism her father had instilled in her. Her bearing was perfect, her speech clear and respectful, her demeanor that of a soldier seeking permission from a superior officer. The initial response had been exactly what she'd expected. Colonel Steele, flushed with bourbon and emboldened by his audience, had dismissed her request with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned his own authority. His laughter had been infectious, spreading through the room like wildfire as other officers joined in the mockery of a child who dared to intrude on their space. But Maya had held her ground when Steele suggested she go play with dolls. She'd maintained her military bearing, responding with the respect due his rank while quietly demonstrating that she wouldn't be intimidated. Her composure in the face of ridicule had been perfect, a testament to the training her father had provided and the strength of character he'd helped her develop. What Colonel Steele and his officers didn't understand was that they weren't just mocking a 12-year-old girl. They were challenging the legacy of a Medal of Honor recipient and the 3 years of preparation that had transformed grief into determination, loss into purpose, and a father's love into a daughter's unshakable resolve. The first escalation came when Maya refused to be dismissed. Colonel Steele had expected her to retreat in tears, to be intimidated by the laughter and mockery of grown men in uniform. Instead, she'd stood her ground, maintaining perfect military bearing while quietly restating her request. Her composure had been unsettling, suggesting a level of training and discipline that seemed impossible in someone so young. The second challenge emerged when other officers joined the mockery. Captain Rodriguez suggested she try a video game arcade instead. Major Thompson wondered aloud if she even knew which end of a gun was dangerous. Their comments grew increasingly cruel, feeding off each other's perceived wit and the safety of numbers. But Maya absorbed each insult without flinching, her expression never changing, her posture never wavering. The third and most significant challenge came when Colonel Steele, frustrated by her refusal to be intimidated, decided to escalate the confrontation. His offer of a deal, hit 3 out of 10 targets at 50 meters, or promise never to return, was meant to be the final humiliation. He expected her to fail spectacularly, providing entertainment for his officers while permanently resolving the problem of her persistent requests. Word of the confrontation had begun to spread beyond the officers' club. Junior enlisted personnel, many of whom had served with or known David Johnson, were watching the situation with growing interest and concern. The base's senior NCOs, who understood the military's unwritten codes about honoring fallen comrades, were beginning to take notice of how a hero's daughter was being treated. Master Sergeant Williams, who'd agreed to supervise Maya's range time, found himself caught between his respect for the chain of command and his loyalty to his fallen friend's memory. He'd served with David Johnson, had witnessed his courage and competence firsthand, and understood that the man's daughter deserved better treatment than she was receiving. The pressure was also building from an unexpected source, the base's legal office, which had been quietly monitoring the situation. Maya's request had been properly submitted and legally sound, and the denial based on her age and civilian status was potentially problematic. The military's commitment to equal treatment and family support was being tested by Colonel Steele's arbitrary exercise of authority. Maya's growth during this confrontation was subtle but profound. Each insult, each dismissive comment, each moment of humiliation was being processed and integrated into her understanding of the challenges she would face throughout her life. She was learning that her father's warnings about prejudice had been accurate, but also that his training had prepared her to respond with dignity and strength. The mockery was also clarifying her purpose. What had begun as a simple desire to honor her father's memory was evolving into something larger, a demonstration that excellence could overcome prejudice, that a child could embody the values that grown men had forgotten, that David Johnson's sacrifice had produced something worthy of his legacy. Maya was also discovering her own capacity for leadership. Her composure under pressure was having an effect on the observers, particularly the younger soldiers who were watching a 12-year-old girl demonstrate more military bearing than some of their officers. She was becoming a symbol of something larger than herself, a representation of the values the military claimed to espouse. But the situation was building toward a confrontation that would test more than Maya's marksmanship skills. Colonel Steele's ego was now fully engaged, his authority challenged by a child who refused to be intimidated. His decision to make the shooting demonstration public was motivated by more than simple entertainment. It was about reasserting his dominance and putting an uppity child in her place. The stakes were rising beyond the immediate confrontation. Other officers were beginning to realize that their participation in the mockery might have consequences, that their treatment of a Medal of Honor recipient's daughter could reflect poorly on their own character and careers. The situation was becoming a test of institutional values, a moment when the military's commitment to honor and equality would be measured against the casual prejudices of its leadership. Most ominously, Maya could sense that this confrontation would define more than just her access to the shooting range. It would determine whether her father's sacrifice had meaning, whether his lessons had taken root, whether a 12-year-old girl could stand up to a system that wanted to keep her in her place. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but she was ready to bear it. As the group moved toward the shooting range, Maya felt the familiar calm descend, the same focused serenity her father had taught her to cultivate before every important shot. The mental state where noise became silence, pressure became clarity, and a little girl became the embodiment of everything a hero had died to protect. The walk to the shooting range had transformed from a simple movement into a parade of humiliation. Colonel Steele had invited additional officers to witness what he expected to be Maya's spectacular failure, turning her demonstration into a public spectacle. The gathering crowd included not just the original mockers, but curious personnel who'd heard about the confrontation and wanted to see the little girl who thought she could shoot. The pressure intensified when Steele began adding additional conditions to their agreement. Not only did Maya need to hit 3 out of 10 targets, but she had to do it with a service pistol rather than a rifle, at 50 meters rather than the standard 25, and with standard military ammunition rather than match-grade rounds. Each new requirement was designed to ensure her failure while providing Steele with plausible deniability about the fairness of the test. The cruelest twist came when Steele announced the stakes to the assembled crowd. If Maya failed, she would be banned from the base permanently. Her father's sacrifice notwithstanding, the humiliation would be complete and public, witnessed by dozens of soldiers who would spread the story throughout the military community. Steele was gambling everything on his assumption that a 12-year-old girl couldn't possibly possess the skills to meet his challenge. Maya stood at the firing line, surrounded by skeptical faces and cruel laughter, holding a Glock 19 that seemed oversized in her small hands. This was the moment her father had prepared her for, not the specific circumstances, but the test of character that would define who she was and who she would become. She could feel the weight of his expectations, the legacy of his sacrifice, and the hopes of everyone who'd ever been underestimated because of their appearance. The decision she faced was more complex than simply whether to take the shots. She could walk away, preserve her dignity, and avoid the public humiliation that would follow if she failed. Or she could step forward and risk everything on the skills her father had taught her, knowing that failure would not only embarrass her, but dishonor his memory in the eyes of his former comrades. But as Maya looked at the target 50 meters downrange, she realized that the choice had already been made 3 years ago when her father first put a gun in her hands. Every weekend practice session, every lesson in breathing and trigger control, every moment of discipline and dedication had been preparing her for this instant. She wasn't just Maya Johnson anymore. She was the embodiment of David Johnson's love, training, and sacrifice. Maya's response to the challenge was delivered with the quiet authority her father had modeled throughout his life. "Yes, sir," she said simply, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent range. "I accept your conditions." The words were spoken without bravado or defiance, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of achieving. The transformation was immediate and profound. As Maya began her pre-shooting routine, checking the weapon with movements so smooth and automatic that they seemed choreographed, the laughter began to die. Master Sergeant Williams, who'd been watching from the sidelines, whispered to a fellow NCO, "That's not beginner's luck. That's training." Maya's preparation was a masterclass in marksmanship fundamentals. She checked the pistol's condition, verified her ammunition, and established her natural point of aim with the precision of a seasoned competitor. Her breathing was controlled, her stance textbook perfect, her focus absolute. The 12-year-old girl was disappearing, replaced by the shooter her father had trained her to become. As Maya raised the pistol and aligned her sights with the distant target, the weight of 3 years of preparation, a lifetime of love, and a hero's sacrifice converged into a single moment of truth that would silence the laughter forever and prove that excellence recognizes no boundaries of age, race, or gender. Maya's final preparation was a ritual of precision that her father had drilled into her until it became second nature. She established her shooting stance with the fluid grace of someone who'd performed these movements thousands of times. Her feet positioned for optimal balance, her body alignment perfect despite the oversized pistol in her small hands. The crowd's murmur faded to silence as they witnessed preparation that spoke of serious training rather than childish play. The mental preparation was equally important. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself in the calm space her father had taught her to find before every important shot. She visualized the target, calculated the distance and conditions, and prepared her mind for the sequence of shots that would either vindicate her father's training or confirm her critics' assumptions about her limitations. Master Sergeant Williams positioned himself as the range safety officer, his presence lending legitimacy to the proceedings while ensuring that proper protocols were followed. His experience allowed him to recognize what others missed, the subtle signs of advanced training in Maya's preparation. The unconscious competence that marked her as far more than a novice shooter. The range fell silent except for the whisper of wind across the firing line. Maya's first shot would set the tone for everything that followed, and everyone present understood the stakes. Colonel Steele stood with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of anticipation and barely concealed satisfaction. He expected quick vindication of his judgment, a demonstration that would justify his treatment of this presumptuous child. The other officers watched with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. Some were beginning to recognize that their participation in the mockery might have been premature, that the girl's composure suggested capabilities they hadn't anticipated. Others remained convinced that the entire exercise was a waste of time that would end with predictable failure and tears. Maya raised the pistol with deliberate precision, her movements controlled and purposeful. The weapon seemed to dwarf her small frame, but her grip was textbook perfect, her stance unwavering. She aligned the sights with the distant target, her breathing steady and controlled, her focus absolute. The moment stretched like a held breath, pregnant with possibility and consequence. The first shot cracked across the range with the sharp report of precision marksmanship. Maya's body absorbed the recoil perfectly, her stance unchanged, her focus unbroken. Through the spotting scope, Master Sergeant Williams could see the bullet hole dead center in the target's bullseye. His quiet hit carried across the range like a thunderclap, silencing the last whispers of doubt. The second shot followed with mechanical precision, Maya's reload smooth and automatic. Her breathing remained controlled, her stance perfect, her concentration absolute. The bullet struck the target in exactly the same location as the first, the hole barely widening. Williams' confirmation of another perfect hit sent a ripple of unease through the watching officers. By the fifth shot, Colonel Steele's confident expression had transformed into something approaching concern. Each bullet was finding the exact same point of impact, creating a single, ever-widening hole in the center of the target. This wasn't just good shooting. It was exhibition-level marksmanship that would have been impressive from a seasoned competitor, let alone a 12-year-old girl. The seventh shot shattered the last vestiges of disbelief. Maya's precision was inhuman, her consistency absolute. The watching soldiers were witnessing something that would be talked about for years, a demonstration of marksmanship that transcended age, gender, and expectation. The mockery had died completely, replaced by stunned silence and growing respect. Maya's final 3 shots were delivered with the same mechanical precision as the first 7. Her breathing never wavered, her stance never shifted, her focus never broke. When the 10th shot echoed across the range, she lowered the pistol and stepped back from the firing line, her expression unchanged, her bearing still perfect. The silence that followed was profound and complete. Master Sergeant Williams walked downrange to retrieve the target, his movements deliberate and ceremonial. When he returned, holding the paper aloft, the impossible was revealed: a single, ragged hole where 10 bullets had passed through identical trajectories. The demonstration wasn't just successful, it was perfect. Colonel Steele's face had gone white, his earlier confidence replaced by stunned disbelief. The other officers stood in shocked silence, processing what they'd witnessed and beginning to understand the implications of their earlier mockery. They hadn't just laughed at a child, they'd dismissed a prodigy, mocked a master, and revealed their own ignorance in the most public way possible. Maya's response to their silence was delivered with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained throughout the confrontation. "My father started teaching me when I was 7, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the range. He said if anything happened to him, I should be able to protect myself and others. We practiced every weekend until he deployed, but the revelation of Maya's shooting skills was only the beginning of a reckoning that would expose years of institutional prejudice and transform not just individual careers, but the very culture of Fort Braxton itself. The yellowed envelope Maya had carried finally revealed its contents as she handed Colonel Steele her father's Medal of Honor. The citation, read aloud by a shaken Master Sergeant Williams, detailed Sergeant David Johnson's final heroic act, holding off enemy fighters while his unit evacuated wounded soldiers, a sacrifice that had saved 30 Marines and earned him the nation's highest military honor. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Colonel Steele's pattern of denying range access to minorities was exposed through testimony from dozens of soldiers who'd witnessed or experienced his discriminatory practices. His claim of safety concerns was revealed as a thin veneer over decades of institutional racism that had been tolerated and even encouraged by his superiors. Within 72 hours, Steele was relieved of command and facing formal charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The other officers who'd participated in the mockery received official reprimands that would follow them for the remainder of their careers. The base commander, embarrassed by the exposure of systemic discrimination under his watch, implemented immediate policy changes to prevent future incidents. Maya's demonstration became a catalyst for broader changes throughout the military. Her story, initially spread through informal channels, eventually reached congressional attention and sparked hearings on discrimination in military facilities. The Johnson Standard became shorthand for the principle that access to military resources should be based on merit and need rather than assumptions about capability. The Fort Braxton shooting range was officially renamed the Sergeant David Johnson Memorial Range in a ceremony attended by Maya and dozens of her father's former comrades. The dedication plaque bore the inscription, "Where excellence has no age, no gender, no color," words that became a rallying cry for equal treatment throughout the military. Maya's influence extended beyond policy changes to inspire a generation of young people who'd been told they didn't belong in certain spaces. Her story became required reading in leadership courses, a case study in how prejudice could blind people to excellence and how dignity could triumph over discrimination. Shooting sports programs for youth, particularly those targeting underrepresented communities, proliferated as her example demonstrated that skill and dedication could overcome any barrier. Maya's journey from grieving daughter to national symbol had been transformative, but not without cost. The attention that followed her demonstration brought opportunity scholarships, training programs, and mentorship from Olympic-level coaches, but also the burden of representing something larger than herself. She learned to navigate the complex world of being a symbol while trying to remain a normal teenager. Master Sergeant Williams became her official mentor, providing guidance not just in marksmanship, but in handling the pressures of public attention. Under his tutelage, Maya continued to develop her skills while maintaining the humility and grace her father had instilled. She learned that true strength came not from the ability to shoot perfectly, but from the wisdom to know when shooting was necessary and when other solutions were more appropriate. 6 years later, Maya Johnson became the youngest person ever accepted into the Army Marksmanship Unit. Her selection based purely on merit and potential, but more importantly, she'd grown into a young woman who embodied the values her father had died defending: courage, excellence, and the belief that every person deserved to be judged by their character and capabilities rather than their appearance. The story of Maya Johnson and Colonel Steele became more than just a tale of marksmanship, triumph over prejudice. It became a parable about the danger of assumptions, the power of preparation, and the truth that excellence can emerge from the most unexpected sources. Maya's 10 perfect shots had done more than hit a target. They'd shattered stereotypes and opened minds to possibilities that prejudice had obscured. Today, young shooters of all backgrounds train at the Sergeant David Johnson Memorial Range, inspired by the story of a 12-year-old girl who refused to be diminished by others' expectations. Maya's legacy lives on not just in the record she set or the barriers she broke, but in the countless young people who learned that their dreams were valid, regardless of what others might think. Colonel Steele, now teaching basic gun safety at a civilian range, carries with him the memory of that Friday afternoon when his prejudice met precision and lost. It serves as a daily reminder that the smallest hands can carry the biggest legacy, and that sometimes a child's discipline can humble grown men who forgot what honor looks like. The laughter that had filled the officers' club that day had been silenced by 10 perfect shots. But the lesson they taught continues to echo through the halls of Fort Braxton and beyond, a testament to the power of excellence to overcome any obstacle.